Dear viewers, wherever you are, hello and welcome to this new episode of your program, Out of the Box. Niccolo Machiavelli, the infamous, the notorious thinker, philosopher, and diplomat of the Renaissance. He was an Italian, and he was an advisor for several princes. His book, The Prince, which will be the topic of our discussion today, is considered by many to be the manifesto for the leader, especially if he is a dictator. Niccolo Machiavelli is also considered to be the father of political philosophy and of political science. To what extent do the ideas of Niccolo Machiavelli reflect the truth, and to what extent are they useful today and for all sorts of leaders, not only the dictators? To shed more light on this, really delighted to be accompanied, as usual, by the very special guest, Ahmad Barsoum, who is the thinker and writer. Ahmad, hello and welcome, as usual, to your program.
Your generous invitation always to come to this magnificent show of yours, that you actually help us all to learn from you many things and to discuss history and philosophy together. But first of all, I am always delighted to meet your guests and your distinguished viewers as well.
It's always a pleasure to have you with us, as always. So to start off, Ahmad, if we talk about Niccolo Machiavelli,
yes,
did he really earn his fame? Did he really earn his name as rather a notorious and infamous, more than a famous writer? Usually he is seen as famous in the negative sense, to the extent that one of the synonyms of Satan or the devil is Old Nick. So yes. To what extent do you think he has really earned his title?
Well, before we start, Niccolo Machiavelli, he is not just a philosopher, thinker, and writer, but he is also a visionary. And of course, when we talk about him as a visionary, we cannot say that he was infamous. And he is really famous because of his brilliant ideas that he came up with. That doesn't mean that the brilliant ideas are good or bad now. We're not discussing how good or bad they are, but he established a huge school of diplomacy and politics that was followed after that for hundreds of years until now. And we can see it happening every day. So he deserves to be the famous Machiavelli.
And
the Prince.
And then about his book, The Prince.
The Prince, yes.
Can it be really considered as the manifesto, as the Bible, as the guide for the leader in general and the dictator in specific?
In general, for not only for leaders, but also for anyone in power. Could be a leader in a government, country, leader in the army, leader in a company even, and also leader in a gang, actually, if you look at it that way. I'm talking here in an abstract way. I'm not saying I'm with or against what Machiavelli put in his book. I'm just discussing the theories and the way he put it as well. So yes, it is a Bible for those leaders who need to lead a group and who are surrounded at the same time with lots of conspiracies and lots of enemies at the same time as well. Because even if we are talking about a fair prince or a fair ruler and beloved by his people, but he's surrounded by enemies in his palace, he needs to follow Machiavelli's directions or thoughts or ideas to protect his regime. Again, I'm saying this is an abstract way, so not to be taken in favor of what Machiavelli said, of course.
Okay, so let's stop with our dear viewers for this short report about the most important ideas that Niccolo Machiavelli discussed in his book, The Prince, and we'll resume after the report.
Niccolo Machiavelli was an Italian Renaissance diplomat, philosopher, and writer who lived in the 15th and 16th centuries. He is considered by many to be the founder of modern political philosophy and of political science. His book, The Prince, is a guide for leaders in political realism and necessary pragmatism. He makes his readers confront important questions about morality and politics. The book, written in 1513, shares the following insights. It is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, because love is never constant or stable, while fear is constant. To ignore reality and live up to an ideal would end in absolute failure, as the ends justify the means. A wise leader needs to eliminate the surviving members of the families of the previous rulers. Weak leaders have weak executives, and strong leaders employ the best at what they do. Machiavelli goes on to mention that leaders should avoid flatterers. Never was anything great achieved without danger. The will to take calculated risks is a critical success factor in business and leadership. Whoever desires constant success must change his conduct with the times. In a world of fast-paced change, leaders have to adapt. A wise man ought always to follow the path beaten by great men and to imitate those who have been supreme. Where the will is great, the difficulties cannot be great. So follow your interests, your passions, and difficulties will subside. Be careful who you trust and choose your friends carefully, as they have incredible influence on your life if you are not mindful. The prince should read history and study the actions of illustrious men. The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. So, careful analysis of a situation is necessary before taking any action. Men judge generally more by what they see than by interaction, because everybody can see you while only a few can directly interact with you. A wise prince ought to attempt to implement new ideas and never stand idle in peaceful times, but increase his resources with industry in such a way that they may be available to him in adversity. Your enemies may sometimes become your best friends. Men entering into strategic alliances were once fierce enemies. True leaders see things differently. They respect the status quo, but want improvement. They want to make their mark and have team or political party leave a legacy. There is nothing more difficult to take in hand or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. Wisdom comes from experience. To lead, you have to be present engaged, and you have to be informed, and also you have to show the way or be in the present.
Dear viewers, after watching the report that shed light on the most important ideas of Niccolo Machiavelli, we're back again with our very distinguished guest, Ahmad Barsoum. So Ahmad, as you can see, like in the book, talked about many different ideas, and so let's try to tackle them one by one, not necessarily in chronological order. So if we start by his most famous saying, the ends justify the means. So, you know, you do what you have to do.
Yes.
Okay, to get there. And as long as you aim for something great, something good, it doesn't matter what means you take to reach this goal. If they're good means, bad means, doesn't really matter. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this idea? And to what extent do you see that this is really implemented in real life?
First of all, these ideas of Machiavelli, some critics and some thinkers, they consider it as commandments. So they consider the 9 that came in the book in big titles, they are the 9 commandments of Machiavelli. But as we said, the most important one is the end justifies the mean, that came at last, actually, but it is the most significant and remembered command of Machiavelli's 9 commandments. End justifies the mean has been the principle of humanity since, I think, even in the prehistoric times. Once the man discovered or came to conscience and started to realize his ability to think and control and lead his tribe or his group of people, he started to develop the end justify the mean concept. And when Machiavelli put it in his book, I believe that he represented or he described one of the basic instincts of human beings.
And just here, so is this something that only applies to dictators, or does this have to apply to all leaders in general? So if
Absolutely
you want
not.
something great, you just have to take it anyway, it's necessary.
Of course, absolutely not, because you can justify this principle, the end justifies the means, in a very good way. Let's assume that a sportsman, a soccer player, or a boxer, in order to reach a certain level of performance, of achievements in the sport, he has to exert lots of sweat and blood. So the way he's doing it could be very, very hurting for his body, but at the end, he wants to win the golden medal or win a certain level in the performance of this sport. So he could, but again, this is an example of how to use all the efforts possible to achieve this end. But could be used in many things. Could be used in business in a fair way as well.
Absolutely.
I'm in business. I want to make profits. So I have to create different ways of marketing or many techniques of management to reach my targets in my business. So no matter what I'm using, legitimately could be a mean to justify the target I'm reaching for.
Which might take us to a lateral idea, actually, which is realism versus idealism. So he said, let's be realistic and not idealistic. Yeah. So sometimes you might need to cheat. You might need to stab someone in the back. Yeah. Okay, you might need to sacrifice a few to save the many. What do you think of this? You know, like, again, idealism versus realism.
Well, this is realism, actually, of course. And now we are switching to the darker side of Machiavelli. When he used these commandments or these statements to justify also or give the prince or the ruler at a given time the right to use whatever possible to eliminate his enemies. And now that's something that I do not agree with, of course, but realism in that case is the reality of politicians. So a politician would, again, be realistic and he would hurt some people to win his mission or his election or his prize at the end of the day, his target, to achieve his target. So definitely this is realism. And it is Machiavelli is opposite to idealism. If someone believes in Machiavelli's ideas and directions, it would never be idealist, of course. Idealism and Romance thinking is for people who are musicians, writers, and actors and painters. And these are the people who cannot agree at all with Machiavelli in his commandments.
Okay, so the very famous saying, the king is dead, long live the king. He was a very strong advocate of this idea. And so he would implore actually every leader to totally eliminate, annihilate completely, wipe out of the face of earth all the people who used to be loyal and supportive of the previous ruler. We've seen this happen actually throughout the ages. How do you see it? How do you evaluate this idea?
Well,
the king is dead, long live the king.
So I like the way, Muhammad, you are putting the sequence of these commandments, because one of them is a good advice, the other is the evil advice. But this one you said right now is a good advice, because I could relate it to a very small scenario in a battle, a combat. This platoon fighting, the commander died in this battle. Someone else has to lead those fighters to win, or at least to save their lives. So they will not sit there and weep the deceased person. On the contrary, they have to carry on the fight in order to reach the goal again, or to save their lives or to protect themselves. So take it on a broader scale, on a country. President of a country died. The country will not cease operation. The country will still go running with its own institutions and organizations, and life will go on. So this is one of his good advice.
So, yeah, you think we should not stay and mourn the dead, but we should just, carry on with our lives. And you see that these supporters of the former regime would be some kind of flaws in the system. Are they like loopholes that need to be,
those supporters of the previous regime, how much importance do they represent to the future of a nation or present of a nation? So a big nation lost its leader. It has to carry on. They cannot just sit down and mourn the loss of the previous leader and then they stop. Life stops. It doesn't work like this. So, and by the way, the history itself, it showed us this in all situations.
And then moving to talk about friends. So friends, he says a couple of things about friends. Yeah. First of all, he says that yesterday's enemies can be today's friends and vice versa. So he would advise you not to take extremes actually in your reactions or feelings towards people, because don't be too trusting, because those friends one day can be your enemies. And don't be overcritical and over-aggressive with people because you might need them in the future. So always be in the gray area. So what do you think of that? Is this like some form of hypocrisy? Is this being practical? How do you perceive this? What name would you choose for this kind of
Actually, I like the way the word you said, it's practical. Yes, this is practicality. Because in reality, if you are so emotional and so sensitive towards the surrounding, you might not succeed in building social contact and social base. And that's important for people who are in business, in politics, of course, and in even human relationships between friends. So I believe this is one of his good commandments or good advice he gave, especially that as you said, the enemies of yesterday are the friends of today. We have seen it very vivid in worldwide after the World War II, for instance. And the biggest example is Japan and the United States of America.
France and Germany now hand in hand in the European Union.
Yes, and so even England and France as well. They were just the two powers of the world before the World War I.
Absolutely.
You can see it everywhere. But again, this is very practical. Also, it is a very opportunistic advice. Because even though, let's say, take it on a smaller scale, two colleagues into work or two partners in business, they have to shake hands to each other and kiss each other in the morning, although they might hate each other inside. But that's part that would go with the word you described as hypocrisy. However, also, we go back to the main thing, it's the end justified the mean. If I have an interest in this person to help me with my life, or my career, or my business, or my political journey, I need him. He could be an enemy, but I still need him, so I have to make him closer to me.
Now,
it's pure form.
There's something very interesting, again, that Niccolo Machiavelli says, and might seem to contradict one another to some people. So he says, if you were to choose between being feared and being loved, then you should go to being feared, because he sees that fear is permanent. But love, if you're emotional, emotions are not permanent. They tend to, move sideways, and they tend to have their peaks and troughs. They rise and fall, and they are sort of evasive, really. But fear is constant and clear. But on the other hand, he says, although we should always opt to be feared, and he's not talking about reverence here, no, real fear. It's not respect and not reverence, but real fear. He says this on one side. But on the other hand, he says you should always avoid flattery. Don't be flattered. Never be flattered.
Yes.
So how do you see this?
All right. So this is the two sections here we are going to discuss separately, and then we will link them together at the end. If we talk about fear and love, so don't be happy to be loved, but be content to be feared. And if you look back into history, all the tyrants and all the dictatorships that ruled for longer times, they established this empire or their ruling by fear. So they started by, once they come to power, they start with getting rid of all their enemies or even all of those who would disagree with them, theoretically. So I remember a very famous story that was told a long time ago when Saddam Hussein came to power in Iraq. The first thing he did, he invited all his assistants or people who thought that could be friends or supporters, and started to tell them his ideas and vision to the country. And then he asked, anyone has an objection or idea? So the first one raised his hand, he shot him. That's the story.
This is the very famous meeting in, the Hall of Eternity, or Qa'at al-Khuld.
Yes,
Iraq. This was a big massacre.
I'm referring to this one. Yes. So just one raised his hand, and nobody yet knew if this person who raised his hand was going to say something good or bad. Just because his attempt to express his idea, he was shot, and that made everyone around Saddam Hussein to be truly fearing or fearful about this man, and no one could even disagree with him or even give an opinion to him. So that's what actually Saddam Hussein in this action, he exactly followed Machiavelli's advice. Be feared or not loved. He didn't want love from anybody. But he believed also that this hate, because as you said, it also fear, fear stays, because how many times, even in movies, in history, we heard about the villain of the story became a good man at the end, or people loved him at the end. Mm-hmm. People will celebrate his death. But never this villain will be one day loved by anybody. The same thing with the people who are nice and tender and caring. They are forgotten in history.
But again, to link it to the next point, which is flattery, like someone like Saddam Hussein, for example, used to have poets come and say all these poems, and they were so articulate and eloquent in their language, and describe put a set of metaphors there, and like how great the man is, like, and he's the leader of the world, and so on. So people used to say that he used to shower some of them with a lot of
money,
gold and so on.
Yes.
So isn't this acceptance of flattery, or how do you see Machiavelli's views when he says don't follow flattery or don't listen to flatterers?
this definitely is one of the advice that Saddam Hussein didn't follow. Or because I'll tell you why he didn't follow it. Maybe it is a cultural issue because, and that's his weakness. Leaders have some weakness sometimes. They like to be flattered, like to be uh, praised, and as if they are the gods walking on earth. And actually, I see this as a weakness in the character. Sometimes people of that kind, they get defeated by their enemies fast, because if they are flattered too much by someone and they get them closer and closer, this person who are flattering them could turn against them one day because of their close contact. And that's what Machiavelli, I believe he meant when he said, do not get flattered. He wanted the leader or the prince to be so strong that his fear is senseless, is heartless. No matter what anyone says to him, he stays away from these flatters.
So, yeah.
He can succeed.
So, another point that might be very much into the core of this discussion here, which is Machiavelli says that a good leader always chooses the best executives. And I really want to fine-tune this with you. Would you see that the best leader would choose the best executives or the best thinkers? In other words, executives here are seen as good bureaucrats, or like they're just, they don't innovate. So you give them a task, they see it through, but they do not innovate. Or is he talking about thinkers, people with a vision? What should a good leader have? People with a vision to work with him, but those people with a vision, can sometimes think in a way that is contrary to the prince or to the leader, while an executive is an executive.
Yes.
He's a bureaucrat, just does the job well. You give him a system, he abides by the system, he takes you from A to Z. Which one would be a better choice for a leader or a dictator, if you will?
All right. So you have now came to a point that we live every day, even on the scale of our jobs. So in the job, for instance, I will just not going to mention any specific job or place, but I'm assuming that X person is working in a company as a vice president or as a director in a company which has a leader, which is the CEO or the chairman of this organization. If the leader, who is the CEO or the head of the organization, has the weakness that he cannot trust anybody or he cannot trust even himself, definitely he will surround himself by the executives who just follow the orders and do not share with him the thinking, not share with him the ideas, or discuss with him the future of this organization in a way to make it more productive, for instance. So in other words, this, we call it the one-man show. He doesn't want anyone to be shining under his management, and he is weak to get any strong person close to him. On the other side, you meet a person who is the leader, but he is very sure of himself. He knows his capability, that he is really the one that thinks, but also he knows that his success comes with the people around him. So that kind of leader would definitely surround himself by thinkers. So he believes that together they can develop this organization and grow and achieve much bigger results. So this definitely is related to the character and personality of the leader himself. Weak ones choose to have executives. Strong ones, they choose to have thinkers around them.
Okay, now, Niccolo Machiavelli, again, I think he gives a very important advice, and we've seen this actually throughout the ages, which might be a real fatal mistake, actually, that a lot of leaders did, and they committed this mistake, and they paid dearly for it, really. He says that in the times of peace, you should never stay idle. You should never stay put. No. Actually, time of peace is the best time for you to innovate and renovate things. So some things might need renovation. You bring it to its older like fame, and you need to innovate, think out of the box, try to create something new, and do not stay idle or stay put. Don't be stagnant. You must always be vibrant and alive, and during the times of peace. Because we've very frequently seen leaders who are very, very super active and like workaholic, even hyperactive at the beginning, but then after they've eliminated their enemies and there's some kind of status quo, they start relaxing. And the moment they relax, they reach the peak, and then the decline starts until they meet their doom.
Yes.
Do you think that really Machiavelli nailed it this time when he said this?
This is a positive attitude or a positive thinking that Machiavelli related to. And simply, we can see it even, again, the same analogy of, let's say, a football team. The football team, if they don't practice during the times there is no competition, they will not compete when there is time for competition. They will not be able to run in the field. Same like armies. Armies in times of peace, if they do not keep on practicing and doing lots of activities, whether it's civil or military activities, again, they will feel they're relaxed. And once your power is relaxed, you are powerless, actually. So that was one of his great advice given to the prince. And it is used until now, of course, in many countries, in many societies, in many organizations. So when you are in peace, be active. So this activity will make you also ready for the war when it comes, if it comes, of course. So yes, keep yourself mobile, active, vital, full of energy all the time.
Totally. And
Good one.
We might be just taking a shorter track or cut to the ideas, because actually there's a lot to talk about, and we don't want to go forever. But really, one of the very important ideas he talked about was to is that he said that looks always deceive. So a leader would care so much about his looks, his appearance, his sort of facade, more than what's within. He said, because very few people get the opportunity to come very close to you and know you for who you really are. But most of your effort should go in the direction of the betterment of your external appearance rather than your inner self. So try to look as the pious man, as the kind man, as the caring man, as the so on and so forth. How practical do you think this is? How much is this useful in our day and age?
It's a bit. This one is a little bit tricky, because I believe what Machiavelli meant by it is that the leader or the prince has to wear a mask on his face. He should not reveal his true identity or his true heart or his true even look to the people around him. He wants always to deceive them by his looks, because once they discover his true color, as we say it, then they could get through him and nail him by this weakness that would show in his eyes and his attitude and his behavior. So that is more symbolic, I believe, that Machiavelli meant you hide yourself behind the mask so nobody can know your true colors or your true identity or who you are exactly. That's how I see it. I might disagree with some others who interpret it, but I have read, by the way, The Prince twice in my life, and that's how I felt about it. And I also talked about it once in business lectures, but yes, I see this is just to deceive people, to wear a mask all the time.
So something I personally think would be sort of the pinnacle, really, of his thoughts was that, he says that a wise prince or a wise leader should always be adaptable. And when we, take a closer look at history, the lack of adaptability was one of the major reasons for the downfall of many very successful leaders, because they totally failed to, adapt to the new circumstances, whether they were local or international. So he sort of, when you read, the book more, you feel that he is sort of asking for you to be a human chameleon, really. You can just adapt to the surrounding environment and always be part of this environment.
Oh, that's very smart as well, because the chameleon, when it changes its colors, it is protected from its enemies. So I believe that's what he meant by it. Although I haven't seen it lately in recent modern life, you don't see it much because the change of ways of leadership and management. But definitely at that times of Machiavelli, it was very important to be able to be living in camouflage all the time. So nobody knows what's going on with you and where you are. So that's kind of adaptation. If you are in Rome, do as Romans do. That's an adaptation too. So it's kind of diplomacy as well, and it's very useful advice for someone who wants to be protected from his enemies.
Yeah, we've seen over the ages, like if we talk about the Cold War, for instance, there were several satellite states for the, let's say, the Warsaw Pact. Then they moved to the NATO, and so. Yeah. And they didn't find any shame in doing that, actually. It's just adaptability, like who has the upper hand now. So let's go and play with the strong, let's be always part of the strong team.
Maybe that's different. I see it maybe differently, because this is called, again, opportunism, which will take us back to the beginning of the advice he gave. That's whatever you can win with, play with. Whichever card you play with will make you win, play it. And that's completely, of course, that is Machiavellian philosophy, of course, at its core.
Now he says that when there's a will, there's a way, and no pain, no gain. Like, he didn't really use these words, when there is no will, no way, and no pain, no gain, but I'm just trying to put it in nowadays words and to some.
Yes.
Yeah. So no pain, no gain, and when there's a will, there's a way. Especially when there's a will, there's a way. Is this for real, or is this just like commercial talk? When there's a will, there's a way, and no pain, no gain.
With the first part, if there is a will, there is a way. That's very relative, because it depends on which way you want to adopt to the will that you want to reach, or what is your will, actually. In other words, it could be very peaceful and nice in terms of studying for a very tough exam, or you want to have a PhD, but the time is short and you're working. So you need some kind of way to achieve this. If you have the strong will to achieve it, that's very idealistic and very good advice. But also you can interpret it in a different way completely. So if you wanted to achieve a coup d'etat in the country, then there is a way to do it, which is shedding blood. And now it is in its worst evil forms, to use this advice. And that's why it's relative, depends on the situation you are looking at. But when it comes to no pain, no gain, that's common in everyday life. I see this is part of our daily life, actually. The sports people, the athletes, the musicians, and the people who have a job. And even if a doctor wants to be a surgeon, he has to work hard day and night to be able to reach his goal. So no pain, no gain, that's totally right philosophy to follow.
Now, he says again that a very important thing that you should do is to take risks. Taking risks is one of the very important things that can make you a successful leader. But at the same time, he asks you to be very analytical. So in other words, take a calculated risk. You need to always carefully and closely analyze every factor and every element in the picture that surrounds you. And after carefully analyzing everything, after the careful analysis, then you can take a risk. So there's nothing is 100% guaranteed, but which again relates to no pain, no gain. A risk is there's always a pain in the risk because that's the definition of risk. You're not guaranteeing the outcome, but the higher the risk, the greater the gain would be, and of course the greater the loss. So that's why it's always very important before taking the risk to make it a calculated risk through analysis. How do you see that?
Maybe this is for Machiavelli, it's different because calculated risk actually is not a risk in war or in expansion or in imperialism. This cannot be calculated because this will be too much pain. But a calculated risk in business, that is more realistic. So for Machiavelli, I think his take the risk is an advice to be more aggressive and more courageous, and don't worry, go and hit and take some land and conquer. But on the business side, on more of the social side, no, calculated risk is not risky. Because if you calculate the risk, then you might make 2 or 3 plans to achieve what you want. And that's what we do in the business, actually. We have risk. In any business, there is risk, but it is calculated based on the...
So you don't think he's calling really for... when he talks about analysis, what does he mean here if he's not talking about...
Yeah, of course. If this is... While when he talked about the risk, Machiavelli especially was talking about military risks. And the analysis he has to make is to evaluate the power of the enemy. Because at that time, when Machiavelli was giving advice to the 7 kings and princes he worked with, an advisor, at that time they were very imperial kingdoms or monarchies. They wanted to take other land and conquer. So that was the risk they have to take. So if a small state in Italy wants to take another one next to it at that time, they have to calculate the risk there, how much casualty they have and what gains are they getting. That's different kind of risk. I see it's more on the military side.
And when we come to a very important part, I think it's one of the most important things that Machiavelli sort of talked about is that he said, when you hit to kill. When you shoot, you should shoot at the bullseye.
Yes.
Nothing less. So, because if you just cripple your enemy might heal later on and come and retaliate. No. If you're not able to kill your enemy, then don't attack him. What do you think of this?
That's the law of the jungle. And that's typical Machiavellian thought. Because even the animal kingdom, when an animal attacks another one to eat it or for hunting, they have to go and kill it. Because if they leave it a little bit with some energy, they could run away from them and they would not have their meal. So if you apply it with the human beings, yes, of course, if you have an enemy, if you let it go with a wound, definitely this enemy will come back again and retaliate and will take vendetta. And yes, it's a very Machiavellian idea, and it works very well for those who follow his advice. Absolutely. This is one of his evil ones, but real true ones in life. Very true.
And then this might be the one before the last comment, but I think it's a very important one too. He said that a leader should personally lead. You should not delegate, and you should be present. Not only physically, but mentally. Because we've seen a lot of leaders who were like in the middle of the scene all the time, but when they sort of, relax and they feel that they're completely settled, they tend to delegate powers to X, Y, and Z, and then those people might, lead a coup d'etat and just, topple him, or they might lead to his downfall. So he's saying that you should always be present fully present, and you should always be a leader by action. You should set the example. So you should really lead. You should be the first in line.
This is working perfectly in the old age and also nowadays in the very underdeveloped countries. If you look at it in the modern countries and with democracy, full democracy, really, you have to delegate. You are not required to be in the scene 24/7. You are not required to be the center of attention because we take France or Germany, for instance. These countries can run efficiently without having the Council of Germany or the President of France to be in the center of attention on everyday news. On the contrary, he could be on vacation, the country is running, and he has lots of deputies and delegates who are taking care of to run the company. On the other side, if you go to some countries in Africa or the Middle East, you find it different. Because if the president or the king is not on the news every day, then people will think, oh, what happened to him? Mm-hmm. Cool, or they must be sick, or he died. And actually, this was very obvious about 5 years ago, or more than over 5 years ago, in Algeria, where the president was actually almost handicapped completely. He cannot move and talk. And
sitting on a wheelchair, yeah, he was sitting on a wheelchair.
But even he had strokes. He couldn't talk. But every day on the news, smiling face, waving his hand to the people, and giving the impression that he's still alive, and he's still actually. But according to the French sources, they said that he's clinically dead. But it's showing on the media, and that's so. It depends on the level of freedom and democracy and the regime of the country that would follow this principle of being in the center of attention, or just live normally and delegate power and delegate authority and carry on with the governing.
Now, last but definitely never ever the least, he says that a wise leader should always follow the footsteps of great leaders that led before him, and he should also learn from their flaws. And he believed that those who do not study history are doomed to relive it again with all of its dark sides. Don't you think that this is like an invaluable advice, really, for all leaders in the world?
That's contradicting in itself. Contradicting for the philosophy of Machiavelli. Mm-hmm. Meaning, the first part says that you have to follow the steps of the previous leaders.
Yeah, the successful or great leaders.
Okay, successful or great leaders.
Yeah.
Are you sure that those previous successful leaders were also adopting the Machiavellian way of thinking? So they were justifying their ends by different means? Were they opportunists? They were pragmatic the same way that the Machiavelli was calling for? Or they were just great leaders because of their kind heart and people love them? So it is a little bit tricky here. Which way he wants to the prince to follow the ancestors?
So maybe the way I saw it was that, like, for instance, if we look at the examples of Alexander the Great, Napoleon, and Hitler, the end of their like endeavor, or their like their career actually was in the winter of Russia.
Yes.
So three of them dreamt of a world empire.
Yes.
And so Alexander was the first. Okay, so that's okay. But then when we look at Napoleon, if he would have sort of studied someone like Alexander, he might have not committed the same, suicidal
mission.
act.
Yes, suicidal mission. Yes,
exactly.
Yes, yes.
And then later on, Hitler did the same. He never learned from.
He fell on the same trap. Yes.
Exactly. Like, the road was open to Moscow, actually, during the summertime.
Yes.
And he was advised to go to Moscow, but he said, no, I want to go to the city that is named after the leader. And I want to break the city, so in this way, I would break the leader.
Yeah.
but he was more emotional than like logical and realistic. So that's the way I saw it. Like when he says that if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it or to relive it again.
But that's I believe that Napoleon's fault and Hitler as well were due to their egos. Because they have seen themselves very successful and winning on one side. So they thought this is the natural situation for them to win everywhere they go. And this ego and the egoism actually led to their doom. And again, that means they didn't read very well The Prince, the book by Machiavelli. If they read it very well, especially at this point, they wouldn't have done this mistake. But again, sometimes ego is stronger than the advice given by any person to anyone. And that's why people fail. They think, if I give an advice today about anything, you think, oh, how can Ahmed knows better than me on this? Oh, I will do it. And then the result could be not favored. So definitely that was due to their ego that led to this suicidal missions that ended their wars and defeated them completely. That's
at the end of this extremely fruitful discussion, as always with you, Ahmed, and I really personally had a great pleasure as always, and I believe our viewers did too. I'd just like to ask you, to what extent today, in the modern world we're living in, would you advise leaders to read The Prince?
All right, very well. Before I go to this part, to answer your final question, I just wanted to shed some light on one of his commandments that we haven't talked about. And I believe it's one of the most contemporary used commandments in many places in the world. And if you allow me, if the time allows me to discuss.
Absolutely, by all means, absolutely. And like we said from the beginning, it would be almost impossible to
cover everything.
Everything you talked about, but we're trying to, talk about the most important highlights. But by all means, please do.
So, what I was going to shed some light on is the one of the Machiavellian advice given to the prince is to be close to the religious authorities. Mm-hmm. He told him at that time, he told his kings that your power also could be driven from the religious power, being a divine power. So we can see it in the Catholic Church in the medieval ages, that the power of any prince or ruler at that time were given by the Pope of Rome, or the Vatican, the Rome at that time, of course. And that's how they were able actually to relay or convince their people to fight for them. The Crusades were, for instance.
So you would get his legitimacy from...
Absolutely, thank you. Yes. Yeah. And we have seen this before in ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh was actually the representative of the God on earth. And he was also, he also came to earth by a divine birth. So who could justify this? The priests of the god Amun or Ra at that time, they convinced the people, oh, this ruler has to be obeyed because he is the representative of God on earth, and we are witness to that. Mm-hmm. So again, the pharaoh gets his legitimacy from the religious institute. Nowadays, you see it that in some of the fundamentalist groups, they take the legitimacy from the verses of misinterpreted religious verses, whether from a Bible or a Quran or a Torah. No matter what, they use or they misinterpret the verses in order to get legitimacy or gain some recognition based on justifying their acts.
So you tweak whatever text you like, and then you just make it to serve your ends here. And so he saw religion as a form of hypnosis, actually, or like some
Indeed.
It is I wouldn't say a tranquilizer, but I would say a narcotic, really, like some kind of...
Even more than a narcotic, actually. It is an addictive, very strong and narcotic, yes, but addictive material, substance that people cannot get rid of at all. Mm-hmm. The more you give them this, then you can put with it in their minds anything you want. You can say, this is the greatest leader for you, people. You have to follow him, and you have to obey him. Whatever he says is good for our nation and for you. And people blindly follow. And we see this every day until now. So many places are led by this. And yes, and this is one of the Machiavelli's ideas that's still present to the day and are heavily adopted in many places. So once again, based on what you said, the last thing you mentioned, that what if I see Machiavelli's ideas and thoughts are present today? Absolutely. It is present from a family member trying to get between brothers and sisters, sometimes one or two of them, they want to use the Machiavellian ways to achieve what they want within a family, all the way to the ruler or the head of a country or a kingdom or a regime.
Absolutely.
And everyone is using one of Machiavelli's verses or Machiavelli's commands or Machiavelli's advice to achieve what they need. It could be the bad ones, the good ones, but it is our daily, it is a human attitude now.
Ahmad Barsoum, as usual, I can't thank you really enough for being with us, and really looking forward to having you time and again with us.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thanks for all your excellent viewers and our dear friends who always follow you. And it's a pleasure to be with you always.
The pleasure is always mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And dear viewers, if we were sort of to conclude here, Niccolo Machiavelli left this world hundreds of years ago during the time of the Renaissance. And he was an advisor for several princes in a very divided Italy, an Italy of principalities and that used to fight one another for hegemony. And yeah, the leaders at that time were sort of hegemons, despots, whatever you want to call them. But, you know, despite the fact that he left this world hundreds of years ago, but his legacy still lives, really, and amongst most leaders in the world. Politics has been frequently criticized or described as a dirty game. And, you know, the first skill that is required for you to be a successful politician is to be a good liar, and to always be able to put on your poker face, and to, you know, always be able to conceal what's within and only reveal it to the right people. The ends justify the means. So, yeah, I want what's good for this nation. I want what's good for those people. So it doesn't matter if I would kill some innocent people, if I would, you know, take part in the form of embezzlement, in forgery, counterfeiting, all forms of negative behavior. Doesn't matter if I take part in it, as long as I have a good end in mind for the prosperity and welfare of humanity. Another great leader was Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi, Gandhiji, like all the different names given to this great leader, or they sometimes called him Papu, or father, in India. He had a very famous saying that the world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. So the common denominator, really, for all those people that Niccolo Machiavelli has advised were very, very ambitious people, but they were not only ambitious people, they were greedy people. Now, on the other hand, a lot of his pieces of advice are very useful and very practical in the field of business and in the field of international trade. But again, not all of them. Like, you know, taking calculated risk or taking risks, making analysis, things like that are very useful. Learning from past history is definitely a great thing to do. Because really, yeah, like a lot of failures have happened from people who did not study history. And if any company really wants to take the lead, it would always take risks. And when there is a will, there is a way. If you really want to achieve something, you really put it to your mind, you will see it through. and also looking for professional executives. Because no matter how good your idea is, at the end of the day, you want to implement it and you want to execute it. And you might be a great thinker, but you cannot execute things. And usually, it's very, very, very rare to find someone who has both skills. Thinkers are not very good doers, and doers, implementers, are not very good thinkers. So they usually complement one another. They need both. So as usual, the prince, Machiavelli, like any other philosopher, you cannot take it all or throw it away all, but you always need to take it, fine-tune it, and pass it through the sieve of your conscience. Dear viewers, until we meet again, I hope you have a very pleasant time. Please take good care.